9:00. Good morning, everybody. Look at that, you look so beautiful, everybody here. So my name is Alfredo Feregrino. I'm one of the associate rectors here at All Saints. My pronouns are he and him, and él in Spanish. I had to add the Spanish, right? The flavor. So we're so happy here that having Bishop Nedi Rivera and with us today at the forum, preaching today. But before we start talking, I'm going to say something that I'm here in the Episcopal Church because somebody pushed me to be in the Episcopal Church. So I met Bishop Nedi Rivera when I was in Seattle, and I was a lay person. And then suddenly we attend different groups, different meetings, and she asked me, Alfredo, why you don't explore what it means to be a priest, you know? So she started the sermon group for me, and it was amazing. Thank you so much. Okay, you had to use it. Oh. And at the same time, when I was a lay person, she was the first one to tell me, Alfredo, would you like to preach for Guadalupe? I said, for the celebration of Guadalupe. I said, me? I said, yeah. I said, it took me 1 month to prepare my sermon. At that time, it was like a 2008. So it was in 2008, 15 years ago. I can't believe it. So without, wow, wasn't me. It's because Patrick came, that's the reason. So we have all this. So without short introduction, I would say because Nedi was a very supporter for me, I became the first Latino, or to my knowledge, ordained in the Diocese of Olympia. And she gave me permission to go to the School of Ministry, to the School of Theology and Ministry at Seattle University, where I did my Master of Divinity. So I was the first Latino ordained. So within that line.
Well, it was my job to bring you in. That was my job.
Yeah. It was amazing. And with that line, we'd like to ask the first question. We say that you are the first Latina, consecrated here, ordained in the Episcopal Church as a bishop. So, can you tell us, before you're going to introduce yourself, but what are your challenges and joys to be the first Latina bishop?
Well, the thing is I don't look Latina, I don't sound Latina, and I was raised with all the white privilege you can grab. And so, the real challenge was when I was in the search. The chair of the search committee said, what do you mean? She doesn't count as Latina. She doesn't even speak Spanish. And which I had put on my resume. I said, I can make myself understood, but I don't speak the language well. And so that was the challenge. The challenge for me was to how do I walk that bridge? How do I make those connections? How do I learn to speak, to preach? I could preside in Spanish because I'd had a Spanish congregation. But for me, it was much more about how do I make myself someone who can be an advocate, be in solidarity, stand out there for, learn what the needs were, become the person I was called to be.
But this in your culture, right? Because your father was...
Yeah. And of course, I guess I'm not saying it anymore in my sermon, but with the Guadalupe, the interesting thing about Guadalupe is that I was raised Puerto Rican. My father's Puerto Rican, not Mexican. Episcopalian, not Roman Catholic. And raised in a fairly low church where we didn't do a lot with saints and certainly not with Mary. So I didn't know about Guadalupe until I moved to Salinas as rector of the church. And so that's the sort of thing. My dad worked very hard to be assimilated. be part of the culture, to have some credibility in the culture. And so he wasn't teaching us to be Puerto Rican. He was teaching us to be part of the culture that we were in. And the hard journey for me for all those years is how to claim back that part of myself, how to speak the language, how to claim the culture, how to learn to cook the dishes. That was I cooked a Puerto Rican meal for Epiphany last year, and I had to spend 3 or 4 days just learning how to make sofrito. So,
Yeah. We know how to make pozole or tamales, you know, but sofrito, exactly. I don't know, that's
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's the hard part for me, to be honest, is expand who I am, able to.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. And for me, it's interesting because I was born and raised in Mexico City. And it's kind of Guadalupe for me. It's like I was living 5-10 minutes from the Basilica. So it's kind of embedded in our culture, right? It's embedded in the way that we do things. For us, it's totally normal. But going back to this Guadalupe, we had a conversation yesterday. And for me, to celebrate Our Lady of Guadalupe is, I've been preaching for 20 years about Guadalupe. But for me, it's mostly the revelatory event, right? Like most theologians talk about Guadalupe as the Guadalupe event, not just the image that's here, right? And I was reading, mostly my theology about Guadalupe comes from Virgilio Elizondo. And I love this theologian. So we had a conversation yesterday that you mentioned something about how Guadalupe changed everything, right? With indigenous people becoming from the bottom up. So you're gonna, you have to use microphone.
Oh, sorry. My introduction to Guadalupe was in El Teatro Campesino. I'll say a little about this in my sermon. Hope I don't repeat myself too much here. But one of my parishioners came to me and said, "Do you know about this pageant that happens at San Juan Bautista?" And I said, "No." And so I went. And it happens in the mission. It is mostly, if not all, local people participating and playing the parts of Guadalupe and Juan Diego. There's a wonderful woman who played the housekeeper for about 30 years, I think, and she was the comic relief of the play. All these people, and then the dancers and the chorus and the drummers and the musicians were all people from Salinas, San Juan Bautista, Hollister, those areas. And so it's local theater done very, very well. And the first time we went, it was standing room only. We didn't know you had to get there an hour ahead of time to get a seat. And we were standing at the back of the church, and they start with music, and there's dancing and all these things. And then all of a sudden, this music changes, and it's because Guadalupe is appearing. And it turns out she's right behind us, up in the choir loft at the back of the mission. And we turn around, and my nephew, who was living with us at the time, said, "Nedi, it looks just like her." And I said, "Victor, be quiet. It is her." And that's who it was for me. It was her. She was this teeny tiny little woman, dark face, black hair, the most beautiful face and smile and graciousness you ever saw. And it was the Guadalupe moment for me. And for 20 years, I went to see her every year, or every other year. The opposite years is another play. But it's that sense of what she sings and teaches through the play is God's presence and her love for the people. her love for the Indians. And the whole story is about empowering and bringing the Indians into the fullness of the church and into the fullness of God's love. And I fell in love. I fell in love with her.
About transformation, right, within the church. And one of the things I did when I was in Seattle, as you know, I was a church planter, and I started, the name of the mission was Our Lady of Guadalupe Episcopal Church. And Sue, he's one of the first one that attended the church, right? Thank you, Sue. So she was the first one to be in my church in Seattle. And for me, it was like, that event is like, Guadalupe is a unifier, right? And for me, it was, in order to, when I started this mission, I was trying to figure it out how we can be together to understand each other's cultures and speaking two languages. It's about understanding each other, right? And sometimes we don't do that. So we just decide to be in our silos, and we don't try to unify, and we don't try to be together. So, and I can go back, but I have other questions to ask you. But and the theology of ministry that we have for our mission was based on John 17, when Jesus prayed, to the Abba, how we can be together. I mean, as we are one, as we are one as you are me and one. So, and you preach about a wonderful sermon with Jerry Shigaki about unity, and then realize wow. So my theology, the theology of ministry that I have about unity, I didn't realize that, but the DNA is come from my formation over there, So I don't know, you're going to explain about this unity around the table. And
well, and the interesting thing is what does that unity look like? Mm-hmm. Because it isn't about assimilation. But it's difficult to be different peoples together. The thought that's been going through my mind for the last couple days is, you keep making me change my sermon by the conversation. The thought that comes to me is, I'm remembering a book I read about, it was called Marriage, Dead or Alive, and it's a very kind of thick book for therapists or something like that. And by a man by Guggenhill Craig was his name. But his thesis is that we don't get married to find the person that fulfills us and loves and all of that. We get married to find the person who makes us become the person we're called to be. And this is the person who's going to challenge us and all the rest of that. It goes with it. But I think that's the image for me of what it means to be a multicultural church. To have people who come at this theology differently than we do, who open us up to see another aspect of God's love, of other aspects of God's call, another aspect of God's community. And that means we're going to be pushing and pulling one another. It's not going to be, it isn't just that we get to all be here and eat this great potluck dinner, which it is that too. That is the joy of it in one sense. But it's somebody who says, what do you mean you call God, you look at God through the eyes of Mary? We Episcopalians, and especially those of us who are raised kind of low church Episcopalians, we resisted this whole Marian thing. And that's why, for me, falling in love with her was a whole transformation and a whole conversion for me. Because all of a sudden, it wasn't that I didn't know the feminine side of God, but what does it mean to understand God, to understand Mary, who says, I am, yes, she's Jesus' mother, but I am your mother. I am your mother. that when she claims her call, she claims us. That's not something we folks who have been raised in nuclear families that are very close and say, this is who matters to me, which is a very, my white fight part of my family, my Mayflower part of my family says, this is who we are. We come down here and we have this little train and this is family. And the Puerto Rican side says, well, my father has 68 first cousins.
You got to remember the names of everyone.
And
so.
first cousins are brothers and sisters.
Yes.
They're primos. They're people that are right there. So you can imagine so all of a sudden, family means something different. And it means we have a different claim on one another.
And picking that with the family, like you mentioned before, like we are a multicultural church, right? I mean, how we can, we had a conversation yesterday about power, sharing power. That it's not only to have these people, different contexts or ethnias, etc., but it's how we are getting together and how we share the power, right? Mm-hmm. And then you can expand on that. Exactly,
that because it's family or because we're in the kingdom of God, everyone's voice matters the same. Collar, no collar, black, white, able, disabled, all these things that that other person that is rubbing us the wrong way is the person who's teaching us to be the child of God that we're called to be. There's, when you're a bishop, there's all kinds of people out there just telling you how wonderful you are. But the work, luckily, tells you, oh, you messed that up. Mm-hmm. The church, because you're not facilitating a community that we're called to facilitate. The image of the church for me is all those nations standing around the throne singing together their own hymns. How do we do that? How do we learn to speak one another's language so that we really can be there with one another? And the power is the power of service, which I think I allude to later, but I may not. But it's that sense of power being my letting go of mine so that you can claim yours. Mm-hmm. That's the power of Jesus. And that power of, he did not claim equality with God, but emptied himself, taking the form of a servant. Taking the form of a servant, so that we can know the fullness of God. So power is really about, the question of power in the church is really about how do I let go of it and hand it off.
Yeah, you mentioned yesterday one of the examples that we can share power is that probably in the kitchen of the church sometimes, right?
Well, I'll tell you, that's the hardest thing. That's the hardest thing about trying to run a church with two congregations, different kinds of congregations. The people who've been there for 40 years when they built the church, and the new people are coming in, and then you bring in all these strangers from the neighborhood who have different names and speak a different language and eat different food that smells differently, and they don't put things away right in the kitchen.
Sounds familiar.
Let me tell you, that was the most oft-repeated complaint about starting Spanish-speaking ministry in my congregation.
Yeah, and then
they don't put things away right in the kitchen.
And then and then we talk about hymns and songs and everything too, right? I mean, how you can share that power. So yeah, it's amazing. That's
Although I have to admit, the things about putting things right away in the kitchen is also the same thing I have in my marriage. So he's only lived in this house 20 years, and we don't know where the things go. So yeah, but then there are the rewards. When you stand there for the first 7 times we sing Pescador de Hombres, because there's so many words that go together in that. And we just love the tune, and we get it. And then all of a sudden one day, we can sing it.
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes a song that we sing together. A song we sing together. I was blessed because the congregation I was serving and the Spanish-speaking people I was serving were second generation. So they were not completely Spanish-speaking. And so when I preached, for instance, if I came up against a word I didn't know, I'd kind of go around it and they'd shout it out for me. Mm-hmm. Okay, Nedi, here's the word. Actually, I told you this story yesterday, but it's one of my favorite stories about preaching in Spanish. So it was Easter, and I'm preaching about caterpillars and butterflies. I look up the word caterpillar because I don't know this word, and it's going to be used a lot. So I look it up. Can't remember what it is, but it was this very specific word. And I used it about 7 times at the beginning of the sermon, and finally, one of the women raises her arm. She said, Nedi, ¿qué es such and such a word? And I said, caterpillar. And I looked at the deacon who was Spanish speaking. She kind of went, And so I said to them, it's a gusano con pelo, which is a worm with hair. As a caterpillar. And she got it. And she said, gusano, Nedi. It's a gusano.
Just keep a gusano, yeah. Yeah,
so, but part of the reason I loved that ministry was how I was challenged every single Sunday. The folks who were in my congregation when I arrived would never have challenged me in a sermon at that time. While I was preaching it. They might come to my office later and say, I don't like what you said there. But they wouldn't say it. These folks were saying, wait a minute, we don't understand. What are you saying? Get us back. Get us back on track. Help us understand. Or, well, we don't get that. I mean, gusano is a funny little example of that, but it for me became symbolic of what it means to try to do that work of interpreting the gospel. I could not preach the same sermon that I preached at 8 o'clock and 10:30 at 9 o'clock. At 8 and 10:30, I'm preaching to the powerful. At 9 o'clock, I'm preaching to the people who are at the whim of the powerful. I'm preaching to the people as I drive to the hospital who are bending over picking lettuce and strawberries. That's a difference. The gospel sounds different. The gospel has different imperatives. And that's important for us as a church to know and remember.
Yeah, and it's interesting because as you mentioned, it's a place of transformation. One of the things that we saw, like the church is in the business of transforming people, right? We gather, transform, and send. So it's just little examples how we can transform each other, right? To understand each other's cultures, to understand our own contexts, right? So it's amazing, it's amazing. And then after the transformation, we can go over there and change ourselves, change the world, and change our neighborhoods, change our communities, right? So, but we have to be conscious about that thing. So, yeah, thank you. And you say something like, and sometimes within that line, you say something yesterday that I was thinking, like at the Heavenly Banquet, we don't want to sit with the people that we like, right? we want to see with people that we dislike, or people that like us. So, remember? So it's like in the Heavenly Banquet, we're going to see it, not with our friends, with the people that we didn't like, the people that we relegate as the other. Sorry.
Excuse me.
This microphone.
When we started at St. at the profile had just a tiny little thing in there that said we'd like to start Spanish-speaking ministry. And Bob and I were sharing this. My husband is a priest, and we were sharing this job. We were rectors together. Mm-hmm. And the agreement was that we would not do continuing education at the same time. We would both make sure that the church was always had somebody, because that was supposed to be one of the advantages for them. Except that we decided we wanted to go to Speak Spanish seminar, a Spanish camp, and start learning Spanish. So we came to the vestry, who happened to be meeting in the living room of the rectory that day. And they said, and I said, this is what we'd like to do. We want to start doing this, working towards starting this surf. And they said, oh no, we don't really want those people in our church. And I just was so stunned. I just sat there, and as we talked it over later, I said, this is me they're talking about. And I later found cleaning out the office, I found all the surveys. And it was me they were talking about. They didn't want a woman, and they didn't want a Hispanic. And that was sometime later, so I didn't know that. So I thought, what are we going to do here? So we just spent a lot of time, you're hearing my sermon, maybe. We spent a lot of time just waiting it out and dropping a piece here or doing something there. The music is so beautiful, you can bring a piece of music in and people will fall in love with that. And eventually the vestry said, okay, if you can do this without taking away from the other things, you can try it. So the following Sunday we announced it, and I was having to lead the music because we didn't have a musician. It's a very poor church. And so we didn't have a musician because we didn't pay very much. And there was a guy in church that Sunday. Actually, he came that Sunday to play. He was a substitute. And we announced that we were going to do this. We're going to start thinking about this and thinking about it. And this guy came up and he said, the musician, I speak Spanish better than I speak English, and I love Spanish music, so I'm going to be your musician. And that's what happened. Mm-hmm. And then every Sunday he would take my notes and he would take his red pen and tell me how I had done the Spanish wrong. and it became, we got it off the ground. But it was scary to the folks. And the reason it was scary, this is my sermon, the reason it was scary is because they knew it was going to change things. And they couldn't predict the change. They couldn't predict the change. But I don't want to go too far with this at the moment. But this is Jesus says in the Gospels so many ways, so many times, so many different things. I make all things new. And new isn't always what we want. But new is what it means to be in a mestizo church.
And as you say, God used you as use each of us. And I was talking with you yesterday about like sometimes as a people of color or minorities is that you have to sometimes prove yourself double, right? And at the same time, it's a prophetic call that you have because what happened with Moses, right? God appeared and said, free my people, let my people go. Go over there and work and go talk to the Pharaoh and take everybody out from the land of Egypt. And Moses said, no, I don't want to do that, No. And so for us, like you as a Latino, for me, it's like, is this a prophetic thing that we had to do? But it's part of our call. And do I want to do that? I say, no, sometimes I don't want to do that, But this is a prophetic call that we had to fulfill. And as I say, we walk with God all the time. So,
Well, and sometimes it's not just that we don't want to, but we're afraid, or that we can't.
Mm-hmm.
But Jeremiah did that. I'm too young. I can't speak well.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, there's Jonah. I don't like those people. Why are we going to save them? But yeah, the thing is, for me, I have to say, it wasn't ever that I didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
It was that, am I up to it? Can I do it? I always wanted to. I always wanted to be a priest. When women weren't even in the thinking about it. Yeah. And as you say, when it came time, we were talking about this earlier. When it came time to do this, I had to be professional, I had to be feminine, I had to be smart, I had to do all these things better than anybody else in order to be considered equal. And that's true. When you speak with an accent, does he really know what he's talking about?
Yeah, exactly. And that's
and you don't, and in one sense you don't know what you're talking about the way I know what I'm talking about. You don't know, but you have another wisdom that this is where the challenge is for me to realize, he's wiser than me in so many ways. But if it doesn't fit in my categories, sometimes I don't see it or hear it. And the thing that the call of the church is to help us shine the light that says, yes, this is a wisdom we need. Yes, this is a way of being. This is a way of thinking about God. This is that we need to hear, that we won't hear if we stay in our own little circles.
That's correct. Thank you so much. It's not like I don't want to do that, but it's sometimes the challenge, right, that is in front of you. This is you say maybe it's fear, and the acronym of fear, I would say, is like a false evidence appearing real. So that's. So yeah, it's like a 9:30. I realized, as Nedi want to have a conversation with everybody. So here, so we can open the mic. If you have any questions, and you wanna.
Great.
The conversation.
Just checking. I'm going to do a moment of personal privilege and ask the first question to prime the pump. Honored to have you back and with us always. You talk about fear and breaking boundaries. I don't think everyone knows some of your story, which I do. And not only the first Hispanic woman bishop, but one of the first women priests in the church. You were ordained in 76?
79.
79, which was like an hour and a half after the pitched battle for the ordination of women happened. And Nedi and I had the opportunity yesterday to share watching a new documentary, Philadelphia 11, revisiting those times. So that's still all fresh in my head. So I would love to have you, if you could just say a few words about where that journey for you of overcoming that fear and what it took to step across boundaries, both in your family. Not everyone knows that story, and I think we'd be blessed to be able to hear it if you'd be willing to share it.
Sure. When what happened for me was, to start, was I was at a meeting, and it became very clear to me that there was going to be ordination of women someday. And I knew in my body, in my soul, in my whole being, that if there were going to be women priests, I was going to be one of them. And there's two actual stories, Susan. One is I went home and told my husband how I'd figured this out. It was a 20-minute drive from where the meeting was, and I thought, well, there'll be women priests, but we'll never get paid in my lifetime. We'll never have real jobs. So I'm going to be a volunteer chaplain in nursing homes. I was taking care of my husband's grandmother in the nursing home, and so I knew that, and I can do that. And I was doing youth work, so I could do that. So I went home, I woke my husband up and said, guess what? I figured it out. I'm going to be a priest. And he said, well, that idea makes me sick to my stomach. And then, that was my ex-husband, by the way. Which is why I was ordained in 79 and not in 76, because I got divorced in the middle of this process. But then, the thing is, back in those days, we didn't have a discernment process like we have now. There were no groups to sit down with and say, this is what I'm thinking about. Help me work this through. What does it mean? How does it feel against your thoughts about what a priest is and what a priest isn't? And you just kind of went to the bishop and hoped the bishop liked you. And but so what I did do was go visit my father, who had been a priest at that point about 26 years and a bishop about 4 or 5 years. 4 years. And I said, Dad, I got it. And he said, well, you know, I don't believe in the ordination of women, don't you? And I said, no, Dad, I didn't know that. Because you were always a champion for women. You had women on your vestries before anybody else did. You always told me you wanted me to do what I wanted to do. You even told me I was supposed to go to seminary because you somehow thought I was going to teach Greek to somebody. I don't get it. And for him, I think it was as much a gut cultural issue. The way I describe it, it was, do you remember in Fiddler on the Roof, Tevye can deal with his daughter choosing somebody out of the community. And then in the community, and then he can deal with the second one choosing the guy who's going to take her off to Siberia. But he just can't make it past the Gentile. And he never stops loving her. And that was my dad. We never stopped loving each other. And we would have some interesting conversations about this. I can remember 10 years into my priesthood, I said, Dad, do you think the people I'm serving aren't getting the real sacrament? Speaking of the movie yesterday. And he said, no, I don't think that. It was little by little. He ordained me deacon because there were women deacons in the Bible on behalf of the Bishop of California. And then he was not at my ordination of the priesthood. Mm-hmm. but he laid hands on me when I was ordained bishop. The vestments I'm wearing today are his vestments. At my ordination, he put my coat. These things take time.
Yeah. That was exactly the story I was hoping you would tell. So who has questions? Questions over here? I thought I saw hands.
Who's?
Behind you.
We have a lot of men running the church at one time, and we have an increasingly large number of women. From your unique perspective, how do we best serve the interests of women within the church, not just as part of the structure of the church, but how do we meet the needs of the community, which, as you suggested, is stratified in an older community, a kind of middle community, and a younger community? What do you think we can do for women in the church to help them adjust to the realities of modern society?
You have 5 minutes.
I've spent 45 years in this. I was ordained deacon in 75, so not. I spent a lot of time. For me, the model in almost all the cultures that I've experienced for women is they get together and do work together. I think part of the reason we have more divorces now than we did 100 years ago is we don't have quilting bees anymore. When women would get together and say, oh yeah, mine does that too. And I'm not gonna have an affair with him. But I think this is what I suspect men need also. I mean, I can't speak for them, but we need small communities. We need places where we can be the people we're called to be. We need places, if we want to read together or sing together or sew together. And the church just needs to provide the vehicles for people to gather and speak from their hearts. I mean, I get to do this because you asked me the questions. This is my story. But each of you has a story like I just told. It's someplace in the little cave in your head, you went back to the place where the person you loved so dearly said, wait a minute, that's not you. That you need to tell that story. And it needs to be heard. That's what we need, I think.
Since we have, for the timing, we have probably one more question.
We do have a hard stop at 9:45, so we can get Keith up to stream the service and Bishop Rivera up to get vested. So does anyone have one more question to finish up over here? Lady with the dog.
Sue.
I met Father Alfredo in Seattle when he started his ministry, and I was one of the first, and it was an incredible experience to be I wasn't always a white woman of privilege. At one time, hear me?
I don't hear well.
Okay. At one time, I was a pregnant.
But keep it up there so everybody
Okay.
can hear.
At one time, I was a pregnant teenager with a shotgun marriage and 3 kids at 22, and somehow got a college degree and a divorce. But so I was never really a woman of privilege. But to work with Father Alfredo has changed my life. And even though 8 years ago I moved to San Diego and I drove up here to say this, is that I continue my work with the LGBTQ community in AA with women, and I also work with immigrants. And this is a direct result of the transformation that happened in Seattle with Father Alfredo. So I drove up here today, or yesterday, to give a tribute to this wonderful man who I haven't seen or heard from in 8 years.
I've done good getting him
Yeah, thank you. And that's because somebody pushed me, and it was Nedi. So thank you so much. So thank you, everybody. So we had to best. And thank you, everybody, to be here. And thank you, Nedi. We love you. I love you.